You're listening to The Adventuring Party. Talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. Hello, it's me, Owen.
I'm Icecream.
I'm still Savage Mick.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Conrad.
And today we are here to discuss what happens when you need to rebuild your moving car in the middle of a car crash. No, actually, we're going to talk about fixing a mechanical problem that arises in your RPG. Now, RPGs are built with the best will in the world by often well-meaning game designers with maybe a huge amount of experience, maybe not. Maybe they did a lot of playtesting, maybe they didn't. Maybe they tested at 0xP, they likely did. Maybe they didn't test what happens after 60 sessions. Maybe they did, they almost certainly did not. But often you will encounter a problem in your RPG, a solution that needs to be managed, a situation that has broken down your game, and like a well-meaning demented carpenter, you go to work. And most of the time, it's a disaster. Icecream, I believe you have something to add on this particular topic.
Well, I have what I would consider to be perhaps a textbook example of the wrong reason to fix an RPG and also the wrong methodology of fixing an RPG. So we can start perhaps from the worst example and build towards something actually positive. My example is a game I ran using the Fate system. Now, I instituted a knee-jerk fix in the very first session. The reason I instituted it was because I did not understand the system well enough at the time, and the fix I put in didn't work. So I just made everything worse. So I came to a realization in the first session. One of my players was playing a doctor, not a combat character. And in, I think, the first scene of the first game, he tussled with a, let's call it a mafia thug, and he killed the man in a single punch. And I observed this, and he hadn't even rolled particularly well. And I thought, my God, this system takes it very easy on the players. You can just kill mooks by breathing at them. And I wanted combat to feel a bit more dangerous, so I thought I'd better fix that. So I completely removed the mook class of NPC from the game, so that from then on, the only characters that the PCs fought were of a higher difficulty class. Now, this was absolutely disastrous, and it turned combat into an absolute quagmire for about 6 months until I was finally convinced by kind players to change my ruling. Because the problem with the Fate system was that characters that are tougher take a very long time to fight. So I was throwing these incredibly tough characters at the players, and I was throwing like 6 or 7 at a time. And combat just ground to a halt. It became a joyless slog. And the fix itself didn't work, but perhaps more importantly was the reason I wanted to put the fix into play was itself flawed. I was trying to run a gritty, dangerous street-level game in a non-gritty, dangerous street-level system. The system did not need fixing. What I needed to do was either change the playstyle of my game or pick a new system. I chose to do neither of those things. Instead, I put into place a fix that didn't work and made everything worse. So I think perhaps that might be the worst possible example of what Owen's talking about. So we can start from there.
I've got another great one, actually. There was a thread on rpg.net, a forum about basically RPGs, and a player came in and said, I'm playing Dark Heresy. I don't like that there's 2 stats of toughness. You've got toughness and you've got armor. And on gun stats, AP only takes away the armor bonus. It doesn't take away the toughness. It doesn't make sense to me that someone, if I shoot them with a melta-gun, that their innate toughness helps them survive at all. So I'm making it so that AP works against armor and toughness. The next post a week later was, help, all my players keep dying in combats. The third post was, I think I fixed the problem. I doubled everybody's toughness bonus so they get it against high AP. So it's an example of someone who's identified what they feel is a problem that doesn't feel right to me, decided to fix something, made it worse, and then made a second rules change to try and account for that one rather than reverting to what they originally did. Savage, do you have any similar mechanical woes?
They couldn't possibly have been wrong the first time. It's just that they needed to double down on the fix. I would say I don't generally fiddle with the rules as written. However, I do have a nasty habit. My initial brush at any system, I'll look at it and go, oh, but I see there isn't anything for this. Maybe I could add a system for that. So I tend to end up like that boy racer who gets hold of a perfectly good Honda Civic and then bedecks it with awful, gaudy add-ons that ultimately make the whole thing... It runs more or less the same, but it's a lot more work. And
you can no longer go over speed bumps.
Yeah, they kind of look at it and go, it certainly loses some sleekness. So examples would be I might start fiddling with the game economy because I think it's a bit too... it's not really... It doesn't make any sense. So let's instead sort of make it so that you need to acquire these other things to buy magic items. You can't just get them for gold. Or I'll look at something like, say, sort of wilderness survival mechanics and think to myself, oh, well, that's fine as far as it goes, but wouldn't it be great if they had to take into account how wet their clothes were as well? It's just... I have an awful habit of sort of adding on, and after a while you kind of have to scrape the crud away to find the game. So I think giving myself too much homework has kind of cured me of that a bit.
I would characterize myself as perhaps the opposite, in that I am almost religiously inoculated in keeping the system as it is in the book, and very rarely deviating from it too harshly. At most, I will ignore a certain rule that technically should be applied, but in the interest of a dramatic beat or a player having something particularly wacky, I'll just sort of smooth over with a quick ruling and just keep the game moving. But almost definitely, I will keep around a bad published rule far beyond its sell-by date. And sometimes this has inspired me to then experiment with rules or to try different systems as well. But generally, I'm the type of person who's more likely to stick with a bad system and try to work with it than to fix it. And I don't think that's particularly better so much as another way of approaching the problem. Or not approaching it, as it were.
So, Conrad, anything you want to throw us in?
I generally, I'd be much more of Shane's way of approaching things. I tend to sort of work on the Chestertons Fence idea, which was
absolutely
an idea that G.K. Chesterton came up with, which was that if you find something, be it a law, an institution, a social convention, and you don't understand why it's there, he was saying that sort of people have an enthusiasm for sort of taking those things and doing away with them. And he said, you have to leave the fence, that if you come across a field and you see a fence and you don't see why there is the fence is there, it may just be that the bull is in the other field that day, and that you should only really take something out until you know why it's there. And if you know why it's there and you understand the reasoning behind it. Now, I think in these days of Twitter and social media, it's a lot easier to find out from a game designer, well, why is this the way that this is? But there are 2 points there. Firstly, I would be generally try not to mess with rule systems without I see very, very good cause, because I don't particularly trust my mechanical chops anyway. So I tend to assume that if it is managed to make it through at least possibly some playtesting and escape through to some playtesters, that it is probably they're probably doing a better job than I am. But secondly, the other thing that usually happens, I've found, when people go, "Oh well, this is broken," check that you're playing the game as written. And the example I'm going to use here, it's a war game, but it's called Memoir 44. We started playing it in 2004, and we've been playing it on and off ever since. But I recall this specifically, and it's a thing that really, really struck me at the time. There was a computer game version of it released, I think around 2014, 2015. And bear in mind, this is a war game that was written for 7-year-old children. And there's 12 pages of rules and big writing, lots of pictures. And we managed to miss 2 rules that are fundamental to the game. And had not come across, we'd been playing this thing for 10 years and we'd missed these. So generally speaking, what I would do is I would just sort of go, double check, reread it. Have you definitely understood that? And the other thing is, if you do think that something is an issue, well, okay, maybe it is the result of a compromise that the game designer has made, and it may not be an issue that crops up very often, in which case, do you really want to bother? And secondly, if you are going to change something, change one thing, and then don't change anything else. I mean, what I find extraordinary often with people who sort of get new rule sets is they go, well, so long as I change this, this, and this, the game will be fine. And then if the game isn't fine, they go, oh, well, the game is terrible. Well, you've never actually played the game that you've bought.
Absolutely.
Yeah, or bolting a bunch of stuff on, which is where I kind of tend to fall down.
I classified there's 2 basic broad problems, right? The first one is rules holes, where the rules just do not cover the situation you find yourself in. They require an immediate patch from you, often at the table, or stick and pin it and I'll have an answer next week. And the second one is rules imbalances, which is a balance thing. But Mick, you were going to say something?
No, just sort of, yeah, I sit in that camp that I don't really change the rules, but I do add to them, and I think that just creates the same problem with even less playtesting.
Yeah. But I would agree with everything that Conrad is saying about trying to figure out why the GM or why the writer put those rules into place. I'll give you an example of a rules hole. In the new edition of Wolfrop, when it initially came out, it was impossible to crit somebody in the head unless you were using an impaling weapon, which had the impale trait, in which case it would only crit somebody in the head. And they went and they said, why does it work like this? Because the way it worked was you rolled, your to hit roll is a d100, and you reverse that hit roll to get the location. And the head location is 1 to 9. So you would hit on 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. That would hit the head. Right? Except that doubles were crits. So you couldn't crit somebody in the head. Because 11, 22, 33, they were crits. None of those are a head number. Except the impale weapon quality meant that you crit on any number evenly divisible by 10. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. That would crit the head. The other one would not. So they were like, why is this? And then they said, just make a new critical roll if you make a new hit location roll if you crit. So it's got a really weird problem for that reason. But that one requires an immediate rules patch. Or you need to deal with the fact that this doesn't work. Also, head armor doesn't do anything. Head armor doesn't work against head armor doesn't work against head hits, which is another issue. It's just flat out rules holes. They weren't thinking about the implications of the rules they wrote, and so you have to make a patch to fix that, or deal with the fact that helmets don't do anything in the game. You know.
Is there something to be said for? I mean, if you're going to sit down with a new system or just a game where you want a particular flavor. Is there something to be said for GMs doing a bit of a rules audit before they start?
If the GM is very mechanically savvy, they may catch that. It is much more likely they will notice it in play.
Right.
When they're playing, they're going to go, hang on a second. X is always happening. When this crit guy always crits, he always crits in the head. Wait a minute, that's the only way it can work. and you'll figure it out in play. And that may require an immediate rules patch. Like there's no rules for learning spells. What do you mean there's no rules for learning spells? There's no rules for learning spells. You just learn them. And you're like, this seems like there's no rules for learning force powers? No, you just learn some more. How? You just learn it, man. Everything else in this game is costed in character points. Why isn't there any force powers?
Well,
you probably need to put it.
Sorry,
go on.
Just to look at that. I mean, if you look at an area of life where people do write rules, which is the law, I mean, our legal system is absolutely littered with case law because, you know, you draft a piece of legislation and with the best will in the world, you know, there are going to be edge cases and unforeseen second-order consequences that you probably won't have thought of unless you're exceptionally good.
Yep. That's absolutely the case. But you may find a rules hole, and rules holes are going to need a patch. And you're going to need to... The best thing to do, though, is if you're having this problem, somebody else is having this problem, at which point you reach out to... Discord for RPGs has become very popular, and often there's a lot of very mechanically inclined players on there who can explain stuff to you. You can hit up the social media of the game designer, who's probably happy to get some feedback at all. You can hit up like the Board Game Geek has a big FAQ section. You can go there and you can find solutions for a lot of these problems for big rules holes, where they say, yes, we didn't include stats for the Demi-Lance, here is the Demi-Lance, or yes, we didn't include stats for the Demi-Lance. What do you mean? There's that? Shh. Don't worry about it. Right. So that's basically one way of handling it. The bigger problem often is games balance issues, where you may notice that after a little while, one player, through no fault of their own, or possibly through fault of their own, is a lot better than the other characters, and the other players have noticed, and are getting a little bit antsy. That's usually a game's balance thing. I'm unusual in that I play the same RPG for often quite a long period of time. The standard, for example, FFG RPG, most people probably play for 100, 200 XP. They play about 10, 20 sessions. But I played, for example, for 2000 XP. I played for 2 years. So... Like the game,
a week.
Yeah, the game irrevocably broke at 300 XP, and at that point I had to stop doing what my character was doing because it was becoming. Basically, the GM could not repel the firepower I was generating, and the only way to do that was make guys so monstrously tough that they couldn't be killed otherwise, and it became a huge issue very quickly. So, a lot of the time, they do not account for long campaigns or campaigns playing to a high level effectively or high amount of XP, especially with systems where you're free to spend your XP whenever you want. And that's an interesting problem for a GM to fix, because you often have to try rebalance a combat engine that was fine at one level of play and is now desperately not fine at the level of play you find yourself at. And that's usually where people start making up half-assed house rules and getting in real trouble. Has anyone any experiences of playing at a high-level game where it broke irrevocably?
Broke to the point where it couldn't go on? I'm struggling to think of that, although it does strike me that when you do reach that sort of break point, when we talk about balance in games, I mean, an argument you often hear put forward is, don't nerf me, buff everyone else. Although it strikes me that's a lot more work to fix the same problem.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'll throw it back. Has anyone got a breaking story?
I did run. Well, no, not run, but I have played in friend's high level D&D campaign. But that was sort of a mini campaign where we were very deliberately sort of taking like 6 sessions to play with like level 15, 16, 17 characters. In late 3.5 with all the different books and stuff. It was sort of a last hurrah campaign. But we were, because of its short length, it was less that we were developing problems so that we were just kind of zooming in to see them. So we'd have stuff like one character would be unhittable and another character would be hit by even the most perfunctory of attacks. one party member would do 100 damage, while another one would have like instant death, no save ability. And then at the end, the final boss had so many immunities that we were forced to beat them to death with their own shoes, essentially. So, yeah, you see different problems which are high level, but because so few games get that high level, they don't come into focus as much. I did play in one high level Death Watch game actually, where we start. But the Death Watch, you kind of start out ridiculous and continue henceforth, and the 40k universe is wonderful in the fact that there's very little in the way of ending. You never run out of horrible things of incredible toughness and deadliness that the GM can summon out of the depths of the warp.
I played Dark Heresy to about 4 years of play. It broke quite badly towards the end. Some Ascension packages were ridiculous. The epic level stuff was completely unbalanced with each other. The GM had to take a hack to it because it was one of the players' special ability was that he had 8 dodges and could dodge the undodgeable. Mine was that my parachute always opened. So yeah, stuff had to be done about that. Mick, do you remember the Star Wars game that was run by past host of the show, Graham, over 7 years?
Yep, we hit a lot of high level play in that one.
We did. And how many major rules changes, addition changes did we go through in that one?
Okay, I couldn't name them all, but I do take your point, and I think it indicates something very important about this idea of fixing a game. You do need to. You're not doing it on your own. As the GM, you're going to have to talk to your players and say, "Look, we've got some stuff we need to sort out here. Otherwise, I can't keep going." It was a fair few, all right, and it did mean that. And I suppose perhaps it is simply something we've lost sight of as the game systems have been more and more sort of focused down in terms of design. Is that for the most part, as a party, you're kind of expected to write the rules for yourself after a certain point.
A little bit of that OSR mentality that you're. Well, it's just that in a more broad sense, it's more that the question of you're not running D&D, you're not running Star Wars, you're running your game, and the rules should ultimately enable your game to happen, not
True.
The 20,000 games of Star Wars or 100,000 games of D&D.
Yeah, you're not necessarily playing against the meta. Now, what I'd say to answer Owen's question is we did a good bit of that, and what I'd ask Owen in response is, what are the best practices for doing that?
I think the 3 edition changes we did between basic Star Wars D20, Star Wars D20 Revised, and Star Wars Saga Edition helped that campaign out a lot because it tended to pull back. Yeah. The reset tended to pull back a little bit of the. Some of the unbalanced stuff tended to get pulled back a little bit by the fact that we changed so that you weren't necessarily optimized for the old system again. But it did ultimately. Like, the saga was fairly balanced, but as I said, no, just give it 4 books, guys. And by book 5, we were back in the soup. And that was... And basically, Graham made a couple of pretty smart changes in that one. He didn't make too many, but he made a couple of pretty smart changes in it. But it was very difficult to keep that one on an even keel. Like, if you look back at that, there were times in that game where it was desperately imbalanced, where some characters were way better than other characters, and it was especially doing kind of the same class of thing, and that we kind of protected people's niches a little bit, but there were problems where it was like, yeah, okay, well, let's not talk about combat too much, because some people are way better than other people in combat, and that's just that is the way. That's the way it's shaken out, and Graham couldn't design out of that. He couldn't basically go, okay, we're gonna. He's like, I'd have to take apart the system to fix the systemic issues that have occurred here.
And I bought a sports car. I didn't want to become a mechanic when I bought it.
Exactly.
There's
assuming you can fix something, like what would you say is the best way to go about it?
The best way is
you've already given some good recommendations. I mean, it's no harm in asking people.
The first thing you do is you take some time. And you go, right, that what just happened there in that game annoyed me. He killed that bad guy in one hit. Right. I'm going to keep an eye on that and see if it keeps happening, or was that an exceptional circumstance. And you have to give it some time. You have to let the system marinate a bit and see, is there something you're missing? And that's a good time to go online and say, I'm having this problem. What counters that? And if people can say, are you remembering this rule? You might be like, I am not. That fixes that. That fixes your problem. If you go on and you get told stuff like, oh, well, just put him in situations where he can't do X, there's an issue with the rules. And they have patched it by either trying to passively aggressively bully the player into not doing what they're doing, or artificially engineer. Like, it's like, oh my god, everyone dies to my saber dies. Okay, well, put them in anti-magic zones for the rest of the campaign. And it's like, if you have a wizard who's dominating the campaign and your solution is to say, well, you can't use your magic anymore, that player can legitimately go, why are you saying I can't play a wizard? Shouldn't you have said this much earlier in the proceedings? Why am I now not allowed to play a wizard? So you need to have the old-fashioned adult conversation with them about being unbalanced. But the first thing to do is try and identify, is it in fact a problem, or is it just bugging you? And if it's bugging you, you may have to just get over it.
Yeah,
To be the adult yourself and go, you know what, it's actually not a problem if the sniper shoots a bad guy in the head with a sniper bullet and they die, and that's all he does in the combat because he spent 3 turns setting up the shot. That's fine. That's acceptable to me. That's acceptable to me. Whereas if you're going, well, the problem is every round he deletes a bad guy no matter how tough the bad guy is. Yeah, then you've got to, you go online, look for the answer, and the answers are given stuff like, well, just, bully him into not doing it, or just have everyone immune to bullets, or have everyone carrying residual force fields. The problems are with the rules, and they're trying to patch in a rules solution to that. So you have to look at, okay, can we fix this problem by looking at the rules? You have to give it time, you have to think about it, and you have to be willing to say, we're going to trial a rules change, and when we figure out what else it breaks, we'll change that as well. And it might be an ongoing process over a period of time. And you need to decide how much of a deal breaker it is. Is it making all combat trivial? Is it making all thieving rolls trivial? Is it making this aspect of the game, the player rolls a dice, his special powers activate, and you just go, yeah, sure, you get the thing.
Okay.
Icecream. Do you remember the 3.5 Savage Tide game we played?
I do. I remember there were pros and cons to the crunchiness of the system. But do you have something in particular you're asking about?
I'm just I could ask you, do you remember the kind of the power curve of that one? Where in the early game, it was 3.5 edition D&D. Where the early game, it was kind of okay, right?
Well, this is the D&D problem, and I feel like it's going to be maybe not a problem, but a feature of any given RPG, that any RPG system, whether it's Savage Worlds or D&D or something else, will have a sweet spot. It will have a portion of the character's leveling where everything kind of works the best. To the point that I think there's a version of the 3.5 rules where you stop leveling up after you hit level 6. They were like, the game's perfect here, just stop leveling up. And certainly in 3.5, and I imagine it's the same with 5th Ed, because it's a problem that is endemic to Dungeons and Dragons as opposed to RPGs in general, is that you will have a kind of a nice mid-range where everyone is working well together, often from about level 5 to say 12. But by the time you get up towards the 20s, the magic using classes just go ways ahead. And that's a feature of the D&D rule set. And if it's something you don't want to happen, then as a GM, you have to ask some serious questions.
Which might be not playing D&D, but also might be, oh man, what do I do about this? And the 3.5 rule set in particular was legendary for how the disparity that grew as time went on.
It was brutal.
Conrad, you've mentioned a lot before that you've been a big fan of Call of Cthulhu, and you've run a lot of Call of Cthulhu and Savage Worlds. Have you encountered anything you felt was kind of degenerate rules-wise, and you thought, my God, I need to do something about this, it's just dreadful? Are automatic weapons just too strong?
They're actually, it's funny you should mention automatic weapons, actually, because they were a thing that came up in both games as something that I thought needed to fix. And in one case I was correct, and in the other case I was not correct. So with regard to Cthulhu, which I've mostly played 5th and 6th edition, there was a rule which basically you could choose how many bullets you wish to fire in a burst, and each bullet you fired made it more likely that you would hit, which paradoxically is precisely the opposite from the way bullets work in real life. We eventually sort of capped that at 20%, because it just meant that we had a situation where sort of people were going, okay, I can just unload everything from this Tommy gun and I cannot miss, which is precisely the opposite from the way things work. So that was so we capped that at 20%, and it wasn't something that came up a huge amount in our games, but we were also using Cthulhu to run other kinds of games which were a bit more combat heavy, and it just came up there. But that was a small fix. In Savage Worlds, we had a situation where you could fire suppressively, which would suppress an area. And as our good friend Dr. Gorman pointed out, why would I try and suppress someone when I can just kill him? And we actually realized that this is an instance where we went back and reread the rules, and then we realized that you don't actually have to see someone fire suppressively. You suppress an area. And that once the GM sort of didn't, because Savage Worlds can or often does use miniatures, the players were artificially having too much information because I was putting figures on the table. And once I stopped doing that and started treating it as sort of less of a skirmish wargame and more as an RPG, suppressive fire suddenly became massively important, because the lads couldn't. They would go, I want to make an observation roll. I think I know what's over there, but I'm not sure. I'm gonna riddle it with bullets. This was in a military campaign, just to put some context on it, so that there wasn't actually a huge amount of combat, but there was an expectation of danger, and that was a change. But that was more a change of play style rather than an actual mechanical change. We didn't do anything to how the mechanics worked. We just altered our play, and it ran perfectly well after that. One instance actually where I made a mechanical mistake was in a GURPS game where I made the characters too powerful for the setting, with the result that I ended up having to be incredibly parsimonious with XP thereafter. And that worked. That was a fix that worked. So
I think the parsimonious with XP thing crops up a lot, and it's sign of bad end game balance, or a lot of XP balance. And it's very common in games, because I think GMs often do a limited amount, or writers do a limited amount of testing as GMs, and they often test starter characters, and they get them to a good point, and they don't do a lot of messing around with high experience characters, because as they rightly suspect, most players and GMs are not going to get there. But when they do, it's very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating for
If you
players.
are lucky enough to be playing a game that has a large community of people involved, and there's a lot of people doing mods and advice, then you can get around that kind of thing at the high levels, because there'll be plenty of places to get advice. But if you're playing a less well-known game, and you get to the top, and there's simply a howling wasteland, what should someone facing that kind of lack of advice do in that situation?
They could be a pioneer and lead the charge and demonstrate their failures to the class.
Actually, that's a good point. A heroic failure is just as good as a success in that regards.
Well, I'd go back to something that Shane said about how it's your particular problem, not not the aggregate problem of the entire player base. You'd have to, in this case, I think you'd have to look at what in particular is happening to you that you can't find any information on. Look to the touchstone of your campaign. What did you want to happen at this point?
Yeah. One of the things that I think people need to think about a little bit more is the match between the system they're playing and the playstyle that they're doing. An awful lot of GMs, old and new, are often maybe not as cognizant of their own playstyle as they think they are, and even more likely is that they're maybe underestimating the assumptions of their chosen system than they might appreciate. Like a lot of people will say system breakdowns when they try doing this, and this, and people will say that why would you do this in that system? Why would you not do this much better suited system? And well, we go into the politics of picking your system, but it's something to be cognizant of, and you could use that as a excuse to monkey around with the rules of a system, or you could use them as a reason to explore different game systems.
But this feeds back to my opening story, which is that I think a lot of kind of what people might think of as balance or rules problems can be fixed by picking the right rule system to run the game you want to run.
Yeah, exactly. Like Fate is sort of touted as a sort of universal system, but underlying it is this very strong element of player empowerment. It's designed so that a player can change the setting, they can put aspects on things, they can discover, they can manipulate the environment, and that's not appropriate for all types of games. It's not appropriate for horror, and it's questionable whether it's okay for, as you say, a gritty street level urban fantasy.
Absolutely.
As opposed to like a big highfalutin skeletons rising from the grave urban fantasy.
Fate breaks down if anybody figures out the secret hack to Fate, which is 5 players create an aspect and pass the free tag along to the 6th player who shoots the bad guy and kills him.
Yes, with a free +10 bonus.
Yeah.
I actually have a question directly for Shane. Shane, if you'd say to my curiosity, you mentioned earlier on that you religiously stick with rules as written, and you mentioned that you have done it with games where perhaps it might have been better not to do that. Do you have an example of a game where you stuck kind of obsessively with the rules as they were, and where that turned out to be the worst thing to do?
I'm not sure I have a...
Random encounters Shane rolled during a convention scenario.
Which random encounter was that?
I remember when you were brand new and you were running it for Leprechaun 1 year, you were rolling random encounters while moving around in a...
Oh wow, that's all cool.
At a convention scenario. Because you roll for random encounters if you travel overland.
All right. Oh... I think I vaguely recall this. Well, that was, I would class that more as not understanding the use of rules now, and that I saw a rule and I just kind of hopped on it. Of course, you use this all the time.
You were right, Shane. It's in the book. It's what they tell you to do.
The game designers would never lead me astray. They're my friends.
I mean, rules that are often overlooked. Let's talk about encumbrance.
Oh,
well,
God.
We're up to 40 minutes now, so perhaps this is a
wrap up
where we cut our losses. Yeah.
All right. I would say the conglomerate advice there is: first point, recheck your rules. Make sure you have read them correctly. Make sure you have not missed a rule. Second time you think there's a problem, go online and ask, has anyone else had this problem? And only third, a distant third of that, consider making a rules change, because it's the most drastic thing you do. And most importantly, you then need to keep a record of that rules change in a similar tome to the RPG that a player can consult. Because they could be like, but I could do this. You're like, but if you'll recall my 15th rule change in this campaign, it said that thing. All right. If anybody else have any final thoughts to throw in there?
Let's go around the table. Conrad?
No, I think we've covered it pretty comprehensively. Oh, actually, sorry. There was one point which struck me. I would enter a plea in mitigation for RPG designers, because yes, it is exceptionally unlikely that an RPG is going to get 60 sessions of continuing playtest with the same group if the RPG writer in question wishes to make a living. And there is I am a huge advocate of playtesting. I think it's extremely important, but I think there is an upper limit on the amount of playtesting, and it is not particularly high that you can expect somebody who is doing this for a living to do. And that is why I think that probably the best RPGs are often on their 4th or 5th edition.
Right. So it takes a few goes around the circle to iron out some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Icecream.
A specific piece of advice I would have. We've covered all the bases already, as Conrad has said. But I would say I'm addressing this now to the other GMs out there who, like me, are not particularly mechanically talented. I would say when you are choosing a system to run, try and make sure it's one with a decent advice base. I have found in 5th Ed, there's a wealth of direct responses from the game designers out there, some of them more helpful than others. You can listen to Mike Merle's scream bloody hatred about bonus actions all you want. It's not going to help you. One that worked for me was Savage Worlds. I had a rules query and I directed it directly to the game design team, and they got back to me and told me why they had put that rule in and how it was meant to work. So if you can try not to play try not to run one of the outlier systems if system mastery isn't one of your strengths, because you're going to end up causing more trouble for yourself down the road than you can handle.
For my part, I would say understanding is the key to enlightenment. Try to understand why the game is doing the things it's doing, and also try to understand what you're trying to do. Don't assume that one or the other is correct or false. You sort of need to look at both of them and be honest with yourself, but are you trying to do the right thing with the right system? And it's okay to monkey with rules, but as the foundation of any choosing of system or changing of system is an understanding of what your goal is. Don't go in because this doesn't feel right. Go in to know I am fixing this problem and I need to fix it because of this list of reasons, and this is a system to do that in because this set of reasons.
That was very Sun Tzu of you.
I try.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks to everybody for dropping in. And if you have any queries, hit us up on our social media, our Discord, our crazy speak pipe thing. Any way you want. The modern internet will have a billion ways to communicate with us. But for now, this party's over.
You've been listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find us at theadventuringparty.net. There you'll find show notes for the episode you just listened to, and you can find links to other places on the internet where we tend to hang out. We are on Facebook at The Adventuring Party. You can follow us on Twitter at AdventuringPTY, or if you head for YouTube, you can search for The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to shout at us, then head over to speakpipe.com/The Adventuring Party and leave a short message. If you want to contact us by email, send us a note to party@theadventuringparty.net. Now, this whole kit and caboodle has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license. Anyways, give us a like, give us a subscribe, please share this episode or any other episode you've liked with your friends, and we hope we'll see you back here next week.